But I do think 2024 has actually been quite a phenomenal year in terms of breaking down the establishment.
Go on.
And well, I think another person I think of interest, of great interest, is Mohamed Fayed as well.
Oh yeah. Well, he was already gone though by the time it all came out.
Right, exactly. But the thing is that again, he was exposed again years ago. But he was sending beautiful Harrods hampers to the Metropolitan Police. They were compromised.
They were.
They were compromised. Some people genuinely believe, and I've heard this before, I don't know if you're familiar with Chantal Lefray, and I don't know whether she's right or whether she's wrong, but she's somebody who was trafficked, and she talks about being at some big society do, and she claimed that she was there and Mohamed Fayed was there and he was Diana's handler. You know, I think there's a lot that we don't know. What I do know is Mohamed Fayed wasn't the anti-establishment man they wanted us to believe he was.
Interesting.
He wasn't.
And then, I mean, we were talking about TV, BBC, ITV, all these TV channels. Is there reason to believe that abuse still goes on, that there are real wrong-uns at the top of these places?
Yes, of course. Just because one or two get caught out, it doesn't stop what has been enabled and existed for a very long period of time. And I think that there are a lot of predators. We see it bit by bit. It's coming out. One of the messages, as a former music journalist, one of the messages that I really want to convey to people is we need to stop worshipping anybody who's famous, right? Because that makes us incredibly vulnerable. And the problem is that what we hear often is parents are so, in awe and starstruck that they hand their children over.
Michael Jackson.
Yeah, I mean...
Who, by the way, when I mention that, I get a lot from my own audience going, oh, it never happened, he didn't do it. What we do know is kids were sharing beds with Michael Jackson.
Well, you see, here's the thing. I don't actually necessarily think Michael Jackson is guilty of what he's been charged.
A lot of people don't.
Right, well,
but whatever he's guilty of or not, that
he
shouldn't
should
have been
never
happening.
have been allowed to sleep in a bed with a child. No. Ever. And that, again, is a perfect example, isn't it? These quite impoverished people and like, this is awesome and starstruck. And so, that's absolutely mad. There's a very good documentary, I think it's called Foursquare, which actually breaks down how Michael Jackson was set up in some respects as well.
Well, he was mentally ill, wasn't he? I mean,
you can't lead that kind of life. And as a music journalist, I see how messed up a lot of people are anyway, but to have been brutalized like he was by his father and taught such self-hatred so that he would distort his face in such a way and still deny it happened. This is a lot of self-loathing. So he wasn't like us. And I say this a lot, but I really want to convey this message repeatedly, that you have to stop seeing people who are rich, famous, or, politicians or royalty. They're not saintly. Just because they're these things, it doesn't make them saintly and it doesn't make them pure. In fact, they've been getting away with it for a long time on that basis. And so I think we have to start taking responsibility. And as parents, we have to take responsibility, because some of the things that we often hear is that these parties where a lot of this abuse takes place is made up of very young people, primarily females, oftentimes 14-year-olds, 15-year-olds, right? And it's no good us keep coming back 20 years later and saying this shouldn't have happened. Those children shouldn't have been there in the first place, and somebody has to be held responsible for that. Parents have to stop taking their foot off the pedal just because they're faced with somebody who's rich and famous and they're compromised by them. So this is not to victim shame in any way. It's to say that moving forward, we've seen there's a lot of horrible, filthy predators in these environments. Stop falling for it. Stop falling for the R. Kelly trick.
But you know what? People will.
They'll continue to, because people are so in awe of fame.
Yeah.
And they are taught that now, of course. A lot of young people, the only thing they want to be is an influencer or want to be famous. And again, we've got some work to do in our society. We really do. And
there's famous for doing nothing, isn't there? But then there's also, I'm almost as annoyed by the actors, because I feel like I've said this before, I think, but if an alien came down now and was like looking at our society, one of the weirdest things they'd look at would be like, why are you venerating those? I understand sports athletes. They're amazing. These guys, the Olympics and all that. The actors, that's quite a good thing. And you get some of them who admit that. Anthony Hopkins, I've heard say this, Colin Firth, I've heard them say, I go on stage and I say a bunch of lines. And I'm sure it's more complicated than that. But some of them, the way they just believe in their own hype. You're an empty coffee cup. I'm more impressed by the writers.
Yes.
They're the ones making this thing happen.
Yes.
It didn't I mean, most of these actors, it could be anyone. Some of them are made. Daniel Day-Lewis, good, fine, whatever. Half of them, it could be, I don't know why we're venerating them. Like, they're so wonderful.